Hi, in today's video, I'm going to teach you the easiest and fastest way to learn a language from zero knowledge to fluency. Now, even better, you can do this method at home for very cheap. Especially when compared to taking classes or getting tutored, this can save you huge amounts of money, time, and effort. So as a frame of reference, I learned Spanish by studying it in public school and then in the university. And after over 10 years of studying Spanish, I had the ability to speak it, but just barely. In contrast to that, with a few months of my method learning German, I was able to get to the point where I could listen to a novel as an audiobook all the way through without looking anything up, without losing enjoyment of the book. And that's in 3 months. So how does my method work? There are two basic techniques that I use: Glossika and parallel reading. The major difference is that I use Glossika as a complete beginner and then begin to mix in parallel reading once I hit the intermediate stage and do more and more parallel reading the more advanced I get. The beauty of Glossika and parallel reading is that they both work on the same basic principle, which is in harmony with how the brain naturally acquires language. In both of these techniques, you're going to see parallel examples, one in a language you understand well, and one in a language you're learning. The language you understand well is called the source language, and the language you're learning is called the target language. So with parallel reading, what you're going to do is select a text in your source language, so either your native language or a language you're fluent in, and then an audiobook in the target language, the language you want to learn. So as you read along in the source language, you're going to listen along in the target language and try to match sentence to sentence, clause to clause, and eventually word to word. I call this synchronization between the two texts. So at first, it may be all you can do to just pick out keywords in a sentence to know that you're hearing and reading the same sentence at the same time. This is the minimum requirement to be able to parallel read effectively. But I found that it can be very surprising. Even if you can only just barely meet this requirement, it is possible to use parallel reading to learn that language to fluency without any other supplementary work. However, if you can just barely meet this requirement and you add Glossika into the mix, you can make extremely fast, accelerated progress. The major problem with parallel reading is that if you know nothing of a language, it's impossible to maintain synchronization. If you don't have an ample enough vocabulary to pick out keywords, if you don't know enough of the grammar to recognize common repeating structures, such as comparison or negation, or these kinds of clues that you're on the right sentence, it's impossible to start parallel reading if you can't meet that level. So what do? Well, this is where I used to get stuck. I have successfully learned languages to the point where I can parallel read by memorizing vocabulary lists, by using a process called intensive reading, where you take a text and you word by word define it and translate it, and then try to understand it by reverse engineering it. But this is extremely tedious, extremely frustrating. You memorize incorrect pronunciations of words, you memorize incorrect contextual usage of words, and it was a mess trying to learn a language that way. However, right when I started to get frustrated with that and was considering giving up, Glossika came out, and it perfectly solves my problem. With Glossika, you are doing the same thing fundamentally as when you parallel read. You're seeing parallel examples in your source and target language, and you're comparing and contrasting them to find commonalities and differences in how they're structured, how they express different concepts. The major difference between Glossika and parallel reading is that Glossika introduces the example sentences in a logical sequence designed to make it as easy as possible for you to see the patterns in the language. To accomplish this, Glossika uses an artificial intelligence algorithm. When they add a new language to their database, and they've already added 55, they're planning to add hundreds more as the system matures, they tag the syntax of each example sentence. So they mark features of the grammar, and then their script sorts the sentences in ideal learning order. And they're constantly refining this algorithm. They just recently pushed a major update that's incredible. I noticed the difference very clearly when it started to kick in. And now the sequence of example sentences, the way it shows you different permutations of patterns in the language. So it shows you different ways of combining grammatical features. It shows you how vocabulary words work in different contexts. This makes it extremely intuitive and natural to pick out patterns in the language. So generally speaking, the way I approach starting a language from zero is I'll do some basic research on the language. Now, you're not trying to memorize anything, you're not trying to learn grammar rules exactly, but you want to try to figure out, are there really unusual things about how the language works that you should be paying attention to? Is it a synthetic language that's going to have a lot of complex words made up of different little parts that express very specific, precise meanings? Or is it going to be a more isolational language where words don't change much and it's mostly context and word order that is how nuanced meaning is expressed? This is the first major thing that I look for in learning a language. Once I have that basic grounding and I know kind of what sort of things to expect from the language, I'll go on Glossika and I'll just start doing sessions. I usually configure Glossika to where I see the sentence in the source and target language and have audio only in the target language. Now, you can use it as a purely audio-based learning tool. So you can turn on audio in the source and target language, and that way you can use it during your commute to work, when you're cleaning your house, if you go for a walk around your neighborhood. This gives you a very versatile tool that you can adapt to your lifestyle. But the most efficient way is if you're in front of a screen and you can hear more exposure to the target language in a compressed period of time. So that's the method I prefer. And I'll generally do my Glossika every day until I hit the range of about 10,000 to 15,000 reps. For me, in most languages, that's a sufficient base to start parallel reading. Now, I continue to do Glossika, but I add parallel reading into the mix. When you first start parallel reading a language, especially if it's your first experience with parallel reading in general, it can be very mentally demanding. You have to really focus not to lose synchronization. If that's the case, normally I'll start by doing 10 or 15-minute sessions of parallel reading every day before moving on to work on my stronger languages. But I find that very quickly, if you keep up that daily discipline of doing even a few minutes a day of parallel reading after your Glossika, you'll find it gets easier and easier to maintain your synchronization and to enjoy the book you're reading. And once you get a strong enough base, it's almost as comfortable and intuitive and easy as just reading a book in your native language for enjoyment. Once you get to that stage where you can just get lost in the story of what you're reading, that's when the real magic happens. Because that is when you really start craving your practice of language learning. So if you want to try out Glossika, you can go to danielshields.io/Glossika or check the link in the description. If you want to get started with parallel reading, find a good text and audiobook. If you check the description, I'm putting together a list of resources for finding high quality audiobooks suitable for parallel reading in a wide variety of languages. So as soon as that's done, you'll find it in the description. It may be done by the time you see this video. So thanks for watching and best of luck with everything you do.